What do you mean you're pregnant for me? Jerry's voice sounded through his apartment, laced with disbelief and fury. He paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair as he stared at Adaora, who stood calmly by the couch. In her hand, she held a positive pregnancy test, her lips coiled into a smug smile. We broke up 2 years ago, Jerry yelled. His heart racing. How can you be pregnant now? Adaora twirled the test between her fingers, like it was a trophy. Surprise, Jerry, she said, her tone unsettling sweet. Looks like fate had other plans. Fate? Jerry's laugh was bitter, almost hysterical. You insane. I haven't touched you in years. He leaned on the edge of the coffee table, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Adaora gave him a playful look, tilting her head like a child with a secret. Well, I didn't need you to touch me directly, love, she whispered, almost mocking. Jerry froze, a sick feeling washing over him. What the hell does that mean? Adaora just smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. It's not important, she said, brushing it off as if it were nothing. What matters is, she gestured to her belly. You're going to be a father. Jerry's stomach dropped and his mind spun in every direction, trying to piece the puzzle together. His anger flared. No way, there's no way I'm a father. Believe what you want, Adaora said with a shrug. But the test is I'm pregnant, and you're the only one who matters in this equation. Jerry stared at her in horror, flashes of their history rushing back. How had it come to this? Jerry had once been utterly captivated by Adaora. In high school, she seemed like a dream come to life, the kind of girl who lit up any room she entered, with a smile that promised adventure and eyes that dared anyone to keep up with her. She was enchanting, magnetic, smart and daring, always the life of the party. It didn't matter where they were or what they were doing. When they were together, it felt like the world revolved around them. It was as if their love had an unbreakable magic that made anything possible. But looking back now, Jerry could see the warning signs that had been there all along, like cracks beneath the surface that he had chosen to ignore. He could still remember the night of their senior prom, a night that should have been one of the happiest of their lives. Adaora had looked stunning in her red dress, the color of roses and danger. Her laugh had echoed above the music as they danced the night away. But then, just before midnight, she suddenly disappeared without saying a word. Jerry had searched everywhere, his worry mounting with each passing minute. When she finally returned, her excuse was that her phone had died and she had gone outside to help a friend who was having a crisis. She had laughed off his concern, playfully calling him overprotective. He had wanted to believe her, he needed to, yet whispers from mutual friends later revealed she had been seen at a nearby club, drinking with some older men. When he confronted her, heart pounding with fear and doubt, she turned it all back on him. Jerry, she said, her eyes filled with tears as she cupped his face in her hands. You know you're the only one for me. Why would you let other people's lie come between us? Her tears had streaked her makeup and Jerry had felt a painful twist in his chest. He couldn't bear to see her cry, so he had pulled her into his arms, promising himself it would be the last time he ever doubted her. But it wasn't the last time. The other sent too, text messages that she dismissed as harmless flirtations, photos of her at parties he had no idea she attended. Every time he confronted her, she had a way of making him feel like he was the one in the wrong. She would cry, shout and plead until he was the one apologizing. You're all I care about, she would say, gripping his hand tightly. You have to believe me, and he did, over and over again, until the lies and justifications began to feel like truths. The day everything changed, I started out as unremarkable. It was supposed to be a simple errand, drop off Adaora's laptop, which she had forgotten at his place, and surprise her at work. She mentioned working late on an important project and had been stressed all week. He thought that stopping by with her laptop and maybe grabbing dinner together afterwards would cheer her up. As Jerry pulled up to the building, he felt a twinge of excitement. It had been a while since he surprised her like this, and he looked forward to seeing her smile. He took the elevator to the 5th floor, where the lights in the office were dimmed except for a few rooms. Adaora's office door was ajar, a soft yellow light spilling into the hallway. He paused, thinking about calling her name to catch her off guard, but then he heard voices, hushed, intimate voices. His heartbeat quickened. He approached the door slowly, not really knowing what he expected to see, but feeling an uneasy sensation twist in his stomach. Peeking inside, he felt his world teeth. There she was, his Adaora, locked in a passionate kiss with her boss. Their bodies entwined, hands wandering freely, as if the world outside the room didn't exist. For a moment, Jerry couldn't move, couldn't think. It was like his mind refused to register what his eyes were seeing. This isn't real, he thought, the words echoing in his head like a desperate mantra. But it was real. It was happening right there in front of him. The laptop slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud, causing the couple to jolt apart. Adaora spun around, her eyes widening in shock. Her expression quickly morphed from surprise to guilt, and then to something that resembled annoyance. "Jerry," she began, taking a step towards him, her voice soft and pleading. "I can explain, it's not what it looks like." But Jerry wasn't having it. He raised a hand to silence her, his face pale and his jaw clenched so tightly he thought his teeth might crack. "I came to drop this off," he said flatly, his voice devoid of any emotion. As he gestured towards the fallen laptop, his words were empty, mechanical. He couldn't find the strength to say anything else. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in his guts. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. He heard her footsteps behind him, a frantic voice calling his name, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The hallway blurred as he strode towards the exit, every step feeling like he was shedding the weight off their entire relationship. But at the same time, it felt like pieces of him were being ripped away. In the days that followed, Jerry tried to drown himself in distractions, anything to keep his mind from the betrayal that kept playing on a loop in his head. He blocked Adaora on all his social media accounts, deleted her number and even avoided places they used to go together. But Adaora wasn't one to accept rejection so easily. She started showing up at his usual spots, bumping into him accidentally at the grocery store, sitting in the back row at his gym, or sending him anonymous gifts. She would wait outside his apartment building, hoping for a chance encounter. "Please, Jerry, just give me a chance to explain," she would say whenever she caught up with him. Her voice filled with desperation, but Jerry never listened. He never looked back. He knew that if he did, she would find a way to reel him back in. Adaora's obsession didn't stop there. She would create fake social media accounts just to keep an eye on his life, or send cryptic messages to his friends to figure out where he would be. She was relentless, and then she took it to another level. One night, Jerry met someone new. Jerry met Ruth, and it had felt like a breath of fresh air. It was at a bar he rarely visited, one of those spontaneous decisions he made when trying to escape the loneliness that had been eating away at him since the breakup. He ordered his usual whiskey, deciding to lose himself in the gentle hum of conversations and the clink of glasses around him. Then, out of nowhere, Ruth appeared. She was seated a few stools down, nursing a cocktail and idly twirling a straw between her fingers. And she offered him a small inviting smile. It wasn't the kind of bold, core-meter grin that Adaora would have flashed to make her presence known. Ruth's smile was subtle, almost shy, and it caught Jerry off guard. "Hey," she said as he looked away again. "Do you mind if I join you? This place gets a little dull without some company." Jerry wasn't sure why he agreed so quickly, but something about Ruth's calm demeanor made it easy to let his guard down. "Sure, why not?" he replied, gesturing to the stool next to him. "I could use the company too." As they talked, the evening unfolded like a scene from a romantic movie. Ruth was easy to converse with, gentle, understanding, a good listener. She wasn't pushy or trying too hard to impress him. Instead, she leaned in with genuine interest when he spoke about his work, and she laughed softly at his jokes. She shared just enough about her own life to keep the conversation flowing naturally, but there was an air of mystery about her that kept him intrigued. Before long, the drinks started to loosen them up, the hours melting away. They spoke about everything from their favorite movies to childhood memories, but when the topic of relationships came up, Ruth quickly steered the conversation back to lighter subjects, careful not to linger on anything. The more he drank in Ruth's laughter and the sparkle in her eyes, the more Jerry felt his tension begin to ease. He didn't think about Dora or the bitterness that usually gnawed at him. Ruth seemed like everything Adaora wasn't: steady, kind, uncomplicated. He could feel himself slipping away from the hurt, letting go of the past, if only for one night. Eventually, they found themselves in a taxi, heading to Ruth's apartment, hands intertwined, laughter mingling in the quiet night air. The attraction had grown steadily, a slow bond that finally ignited. As they stumbled through her front door, their lips found each other in a way that felt both urgent and tender. Even in that moment, Ruth was sticking to a script, Adora's script. When they finally reached the bedroom, Ruth broke their kiss, her voice barely a whisper. "We should use a condom," she insisted, her breath warm against his neck. "Of course," Jerry replied without hesitation, reaching into his pocket. It was the responsible thing to do. He hadn't thought twice about it. The night was filled with the kind of passion that made Jerry forget, even if briefly, about everything that had gone wrong in his life. Ruth made him feel wanted, seen in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. He fell asleep that night with a sense of peace, convinced that maybe things were finally starting to look up. But Ruth wasn't asleep beside him. When he woke up, the space in the bed was cold, as though she had been gone for hours. He groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes and scanning the room for signs of where she might have gone. Her shoes were gone, and so was her purse. He found the hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter that read, "Had to leave early for work. Last night was fun. Ruth." It seemed innocent enough. But for some reason, it left a strange taste in his mouth. He brushed it off, convincing himself that he was overthinking things, that not every encounter had to be the beginning of something more. He tucked the memory of the night away as a fleeting moment of happiness and moved on with his day. Meanwhile, Ruth was fulfilling the real reason for her presence in Jerry's life. As soon as she had slipped out of the apartment, she had gone straight to Adora's place, the bag containing the used condoms clenched tightly in her hand. She knocked twice on the door, and Adaora answered almost immediately, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Yeah," Ruth said, handling over the bag. "You better hold up your end of the deal." Adora's lips curved into a satisfied smirk as she took the bag. "Don't worry," she replied, "you get your money." Ruth hesitated for a moment, as if something was weighing on her conscience, but she quickly brushed it off. She wasn't paid to ask questions or feel guilty about it. "Good luck with whatever you're doing," she muttered before leaving. Adaora didn't bother responding. She took the bag and headed straight for the bathroom, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. There was no turning back now. She followed the steps she had carefully researched, performing the process with a precision that betrayed the madness of her scheme. When she finished, she sank to the floor, breathless with the thought of what she had just done. Weeks later, Adaora stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hand. The positive result stared back at her, filling her with an overwhelming mix of triumph and fear. She had succeeded. She had managed to bring Jerry back into her life, one way or another. Meanwhile, Jerry's life continued on as usual, oblivious to the storm that was about to re-enter his world. He had put his night with Ruth behind him, thinking of it as a one-time fling that had helped him move forward. But Adaora had other plans. The following weeks would bring unexpected encounters, suspicious texts, and a knock on his door that would change everything. When Jerry finally saw Adaora, standing there, her face a picture of triumph, the words that came out of her mouth nearly knocked the breath out of him. "What do you mean you're pregnant?" he yelled, his voice breaking with disbelief. "We broke up 2 years ago." Adora's eyes glittered as she held up the positive test, her fingers trembling with a mixture of victory and desperation. "It's yours, Jerry. I'm pregnant and you're going to be a father." As the weight of her words sank in, Jerry felt a sickening twist in his guts, as if the ground had crumbled beneath his feet. Jerry could barely process the words spilling from Adora's lips. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice strained with disbelief, his brows furrowed as if trying to piece together a puzzle that made no sense. "You expect me to believe that after everything, we haven't even been together for 2 years?" Adora's smile widened as she brandished the pregnancy test, waving the positive results in front of his face. "Believe what you want, Jerry," she said, her tone annoyingly calm, "but the proof is right here." Jerry ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply as anger, confusion, and a touch of fear wailed inside him. "We're going to the hospital," he declared, his voice firm. "We'll get this confirmed by a real doctor, right now." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed his car keys. Adaora followed him out the door, the silence between them only broken by the occasional sound of the detonator. Jerry's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he fought the urge to yell or demand answers that she might twist. He needed to hear from a professional, not from Adaora. The hospital waiting room felt eerily quiet, even as nurses and patients moved around them. Jerry stared at the floor, his knees bouncing nervously. Across from him, Adaora sat with her arms folded, glancing around as if the surroundings were merely a formality to her. Jerry's best friend, Dr. James, finally emerged from one of the back rooms. His expression was guided as he approached them, carrying a clipboard. "All right," he began, trying to keep his voice neutral. "We've completed the blood test. Let's go to my office." The three of them shuffled into the cramped office, and James closed the door behind them, a somber look on his face. He took his seat behind the desk, glancing briefly at Jerry before turning to Adaora. "Adaora," said softly, "the test confirms that you're indeed pregnant." Adora's lips curled into a self-satisfied smirk as she looked over at Jerry, who still sat stiffly in the chair. She wanted to relish this moment, to see the shock on his face, to watch his disbelief crumble under the weight of reality. But James wasn't finished. He cleared his throat, his fingers tapping lightly on the clipboard. "There's more," he said, shifting his gaze between them. "We were able to perform a paternity test, since Adaora is far enough along for us to collect a fetal DNA sample." He took a breath, his voice steadying. "The result confirms that Jerry is the father." Jerry's heart dropped into his stomach. His hands gripped the armrest of the chair, as if trying to anchor himself into a reality that felt increasingly surreal. He shook his head slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "How is that even possible?" he murmured, his thoughts racing back to his one-night roots. Could Adaora have? But how? James watched his friend with a sympathetic look, as if he knew the question swirling in Jerry's mind. "There's something else I need to share," James added, his tone softening further. "It's important for both of you to understand the risks here." He set the clipboard down and folded his hands together. "Jerry, Adaora, both of you have AS genotypes." Adora's smirk faded instantly. Her expression shifted from smugness to confusion, then quickly to a dawning realization. Her fingers gripped the edge of her chair, as if it might steady the sudden unsteadiness she felt. "AS," she echoed, almost like the term was foreign to her. Jerry looked up at James, his eyes narrowing with concern. "What does that mean for the baby?" His voice was low, almost as if he were afraid of the answer. James took a deep breath, his gaze steady on both of them. "If the baby inherits the sickle cell gene from both of you," he began gently, "it will have sickle cell disease. There's a 1 in 4 chances that the child could end up with the condition." Adaora felt a cold chill creep up her spine. Her mind raced back to biology lessons she had barely paid attention to in school, and to vague conversations she brushed off in the past. She had known about Jerry's genotype casually, but it hadn't seemed like something that mattered. Until now, the consequences of her action loomed before her, and for the first time, her carefully crafted plan seemed to be unraveling. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, this can't be happening." Her hands began to tremble, and she gripped the arms of the chair to steady herself. "There has to be something that can be done," she said desperately, turning her gaze to James. "Some treatment, some prevention." James shook his head gently. "There's no cure for sickle cell disease. There are treatments that can help manage the symptoms, but the condition can be very painful and could lead to life-threatening complications." He gave a reassuring look, trying to soften the blow. "There are things we can do. Genetic counseling, prenatal care, but the risks remain." The weight of the words hung heavily in the air. Adaora's gaze darted to Jerry, but the expression on his face was one of utter devastation, mixed with anger. She could see it in his eyes. This wasn't the resolution she hoped for. She had been so confident, so blended by her obsession to have him back in her life, that she had never considered what it would mean to bring a child into the world under these circumstances. "You didn't think this through, did you?" Jerry's voice was laced with bitterness as he broke the silence. "You were so fixated on trapping me that you didn't even consider what this could mean for the baby or for me." Adaora stood, her legs unsteady as she faced him. "I wanted to fix things," she stammered. "I wanted to give us another chance." Her voice trembled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she looked at him with pleading eyes. "Jerry, I love you. I thought love." Jerry's voice was a harsh whisper. He shook his head, standing to his feet and stepping away from her. "You call this love?" He gestured around the room, as if the air itself were tainted by the situation. "What kind of person manipulates someone else's life like this?" Did you really think a baby will make me forget what you did?" His words struck her like a slap. Adora's face crumbled as she tried to find the right words, some way to make him understand. "I was scared of losing you, Jerry," she confessed, her voice breaking. I thought if there was a reason for you to stay." "There is no reason, Adora," he snapped, his voice cracking under the strain of emotion. "Not anymore." He turned away, heading for the door. "I need some time to think," he said, his tone final. "Don't contact me until I decide how to deal with this." As Jerry walked out of the office, leaving Adora standing there with her world crumbling around her, she sank back into the chair, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She hadn't just failed to bring him back. She had destroyed any chance of ever doing so. And as the fear of sickle cell loomed over her, for the first time she didn't know if she could fix things. But deep down, as the reality of her situation sank in, a part of her wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet. I'll make this work," she whispered to herself, her voice a hollow echo in the empty room. "I have to." But the assurance she once had was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread that no amount of scheming could dispel.